Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, Lynn Sheft makes a return visit to talk about her literary influences and ambitions and to introduce us to her new novel, Saving Maria. After an illustrious career as a copywriter and creative director in South Florida, where she also taught ESL classes as an adjunct professor, Lynn relocated to Connecticut and began writing fiction full-time. Her credits include the short story A Tryst with Fate, which was published in Seascape, the Best New England Crime Stories 2019, and the full-length suspense novel The Deadly Game. Saving Maria was inspired by a former student of Lynn's who survived a kidnapping in her homeland before coming to America. In the novel, Maria, who was kidnapped and held for ransom by a Colombian rebel group before a daring rescue, has gained political asylum in the United States. But she must put her life on the line and leave behind her husband and two young children to sneak back into Colombia when her father falls gravely ill. Can she be saved again? Now, please join me as I go between the lines with Lynn Sheft. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Central Booking. Today we are going between the lines with Lynn Sheft, who is the author most recently of Saving Maria. Welcome back to the show, Lynn.
Thank you so much, John.
I'm happy to have you back. So anyway, we're going to do sort of my rapid fire between the lines in a moment, but you have a pretty new book out now, Saving Maria. So I wanted to start the show by asking you a bit about this book. So first off, if you can just tell us what is the basic premise for this book and also the real life inspiration behind it, because this comes from a story that you learned from a student of yours years ago. And I think people would be intrigued to hear, the germ of an idea that resulted in this novel.
Yes, exactly. I was teaching ESOL to immigrants, legal immigrants. When I was living in South Florida, I was teaching at Broward College, teaching ESOL. And these students were fabulous. They were so grateful to be here. They were here because of political asylum. A lot of them felt like their lives were in danger. And so part of teaching ESOL, I always had them engage in conversation with me and amongst each other before I actually started a lesson so that they would get used to speaking English without a judgmental atmosphere. So one of my students, I'm calling her Maria, but that was not her real name. One of the days we talked, she told me, I said, tell me about you. I asked the students, tell me why you came here. And she said, well, in political asylum. She says, but I was kidnapped by FARC, which was a rebel group in Colombia, in Bogotá, Colombia. And I was held prisoner. I was kidnapped and ransomed for 4 months before I was rescued. And they demanded $4 million to my father. So I said, my gosh, so what happened? She said, well, they called my father, who's very wealthy. He owned this big company. And they asked him for the $3 million. And he told them, no, I'm not paying the ransom. My daughter's married and she has a husband who's responsible for her. She's my daughter, but she's no longer my responsibility. So, of course, anybody overhearing the conversation was incensed in the family. So what happened next? Eventually, they kept negotiating. So I thought, this is really interesting. She told me about this and I said, can I interview you? It sounds like a great book. And she said, sure, I'll arrange it. We can go to my home and my husband will be to help translate because she wasn't proficient in English. But her husband was multilingual. He spoke like 5 languages. So I said, great. So I went over to their home. They lived in Pembroke Pines, which is South Florida. and her husband was there. We had 2 meetings, and she told me her whole scenario of what happened, which is all in the book. The book starts out with it's her mother talking to her when she's living in South Florida, and then the book goes into a flashback. So the flashback tells exactly how it all happened, how she was kidnapped. So she suffered greatly. It was horrible. And I said, well, this makes a great story. And I said, so now you're here, you're a political asylum, you're a legal immigrant who went through all the proper channels. And she said, yeah, she went, they went to the American embassy. And finally they got approval and got the green card in the whole family. So it was Maria, her husband, and her 2 little girls. So that's where it all started. I said, I've got to tell the story. I mean, they struggled and they eventually got here, and they're so grateful that they live in the United States of America. But, they did it legally,
Right. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. File that under the truth is stranger than fiction. And then in the story too, talk about suspense. This is a novel of suspense. So Maria is under protection in America and then has to go back to Colombia because her father is ill. And so, there's that question of whether or not the rebels will retaliate against her if they find out that she happens to be back in Colombia. So it's a really propulsive book. And I wanted to ask you a bit about the structure, because this novel is very complex. Not only is it multiple points of view, multiple characters, but you have multiple locations, I will say, countries, territories, multiple timelines. We're going back and forth in time, and sort of multiple cultures and even languages at times that you intersperse throughout the book. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you weave that all together into a structure that's easy to read, because I would assume that was quite complex to write.
Well, what I had to do is I had to develop a linear timeline. And I thought, well, the best thing was to open it on the phone call from her mother telling her father's dying. And she felt, her mother's begging her to come back. And of course, Maria doesn't want to go. She's safe in the United States of America. Her 2 children are there and her husband. And she knows that if she went back to Bogotá, Colombia, she's going to lose her green card, and she would also risk being killed by FARC, because after she was rescued by the Colombian Gala forces, which is similar to a SWAT team here in the United States, she said they would kill her. One of the FARCs called her after she was rescued and said, Maria, if we catch you, we're going to kill you. So, they had to make haste to get out of the country. So I thought, okay, if she can't go back, but after interviewing her, I said, so Maria, I said, what if something happened, like to your parents, or something happened? If your father was sick, she says, well, I can't go back. So that was the springboard for the story, that her mother calls her and he says her father is dying from chronic kidney disease. He needs a transplant. And she begs her to come back before her father dies. He's on the list for a kidney transplant. So she's like, like going crazy, trying to figure out, should I go, not go? And that's part of the beginning of the book, where she's torn about what she should do, leave her family or go to Bogotá, Colombia, and reconcile with her father before he dies. So
Right.
that was the whole crux of what got me going on the story.
Right. And it's a good hook, because how do you say no to your dying parent, despite the fact that it puts you in grave danger? And I wanted to ask you too, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book is how you intersperse sort of moments of high drama with more simply domestic tasks, because not only do we get to see Maria, in this very fraught situation, but we also get to see her at home as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter. And when you think about it, I mean, not only does that help with character development, but it kind of shows us as the reader what's really at stake when she has to pick up and go back to Colombia, because who and what is waiting for her back at home should she arrive back safely. So I'm wondering, if you can talk about melding those two elements, the high drama of sort of the suspense story with the life that she has outside of all of that.
Well, she, when she goes back to Colombia, to Bogotá, she is enjoying her mother's companionship and reconnecting with her father, and they get over their problems because her father had said, Maria is married, it's not my responsibility. That had hurt her when she heard about it. She didn't know when it happened. But coming back to that and the drama of that, and then coming back to her husband and her children, she was very conflicted about what to do. And she was very scared, what was going to happen. But she was going to wait because she wanted her father to get this transplant. But then there's another person who was responsible, that you find out later, who was responsible for her being kidnapped. And that makes everybody like really scared, because that's really the villain in the story, that heightens the drama and the scariness. And is she going to make it? Is she going to die? Because it all keeps going, and they're going to try and get her. And they, if you read the novel, you're going to see what happens.
Well, there you go. Who wouldn't want to read the novel after hearing that? And it's interesting because it really is one of those stories about an ordinary person drawn into an extraordinary circumstance, and you never think it's going to happen to you until it does. And then you hear that story, and it makes for a great novel. So Saving Maria is available right now. Pick it up. And now we are going to go between the lines. Are you ready?
Yes.
I know you're ready. All right. So taking you a trip back in time. As a child, did you wear your literary lust loud and proud, or were you a closet bibliophile?
Well, I was very shy. I was an only child. So I didn't, make a big to do. I would go to the library with the rest of the class, and I would pick out my books and enjoy them, but I never talked about it to anybody. I just was, I'm getting a book.
Sure, fair enough. Well, now you write them, and I think that says everything. But I guess natural progression of that question is, what books were you likely to be caught keeping company with under the covers, assuming you were one of those readers with the flashlight, after lights out at night? What kind of books were you reading back then?
Well, when I was young, elementary school, I was reading Nancy Drew. I loved Nancy Drew. I devoured those books. As I got older, then I started reading other books. And the one book that made me decide I wanted to be a writer, an author, was Gone with the Wind.
Mm.
I read that book, and it transported me to another time, another place, and all those characters. And I was so enthralled. I said, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to write and do the same thing for readers.
Well, an interesting transitional point, because I'm going to ask you, about books that you have meant to read, or an author that you've meant to read and just haven't gotten around to. And I feel like Gone with the Wind is one of those books for me. Like, it's on my list. I just haven't gotten to it yet. And then I hear you speak so highly of it that I need to. So now you all know what is on my list. But in looking back, is there a book or an author that you've been meaning to read, and for whatever reason, it just hasn't happened yet?
Actually, no, because I'm a voracious reader. I mean, I read everything, I particularly like suspense and crime fiction. However, I read a book and finished it today about, it was called, I think it was called The Seat. it was about, it was nonfiction, which I normally don't pick up, but it was about the POWs during Vietnam War. And it was about their capture and what the suffering they went through. And I was enthralled by it. I could not put the book down. I had no idea what they went through, but the reason why I decided to read it is when we lived in Plantation, Florida, our neighbor, his name was John. He had been a prisoner of war, and he talked briefly of his experience. And there are certain things he didn't want to talk about. And I thought, wow, what an impact it had on him and his personality. So I thought I would like to read this and understand more about it because, I was like in college when that was going on.
Right.
Everybody was protesting the war and all that. And then when they all came back, a group of women arranged meetings, basically a date with these men that were coming back as prisoners of war. And I met with one, and he was, it was horrible to understand what he went through. And he had a hard time talking about anything. He really didn't want to talk, but he was like overwhelmed by how much the country had changed. The morals had changed. This was the hippie days and, free love and all that. He just could not understand it because he had been gone, was it 8 or 9 years? They were prisoners. So I wanted to read about that because these people would not really talk about what they went through. Right. So I was able to understand what they did.
I was going to say, and I think that's the power of books. It gives you an insight into people and places that you might not otherwise know. You might think that and then you read something like that and you understand somebody on a completely different level. And that was The Seat, you said?
And that's why I wrote this book, Saving Maria, because I wanted people to know what these people in Colombia went through when FARC, which was the rebel group, was running rampant all over Colombia, kidnapping people for money so they could fuel their war. And also they were also doing, sending drugs out and all that stuff. And I wanted people to understand what the people went through and what it takes to legally come to this country for a real reason, a legitimate reason, was political asylum, which means you feel your life is in danger. These people came here not because of economic reasons, because they wanted a better life. At that time, to get here, it had to be political asylum for knowing that you might die or somebody's going to kill you.
Right.
No other. And that has, now we know that's not happening because it's immigrants have not been processed properly. So I would like people to understand what it's really like to go through the right channels.
Right. And again, I think that's the importance of books. We all make assumptions and we don't know what we don't know until we learn it. So you just gave us a nonfiction recommendation, but you said that your normal lane tends to be suspense novels. So I wanted to ask you too, is there anything that you've read very recently that is still in mind, that is a novel that you would also, recommend to readers that you'd like to talk up a little bit?
Well, I like Dennis Lehane's novel. He just had a new novel come out. It escapes my memory. Brand new one. You can find it on Amazon. He's a very good writer. His stories are terrific because they're not formula. Right. He writes good stories and he's a good storyteller. So I always recommend him.
Excellent. That's my next question for you. Other than Dennis Lehane, is there an author or a book that, regardless of the reader, you feel comfortable recommending?
John Grisham is one, and Michael Connolly. I have other friends. Let's see. Read, what's his name? What's his last name? Can't remember.
Coleman?
Yeah, he's a good writer. There are several in our writers community here in Connecticut. They're all, a lot of them are good, but I don't read every one of them, but I support them.
I was going to say you just read more than most, but I have found it's impossible to read all the books you want to read. I just surround myself with them, and I think someday, and that sort of keeps me going. They're there waiting for when I have that moment. So let me ask you this. I'm going to tweak this question a bit because oftentimes I have authors who, might have 10, 20, 30 books. You have 2 books out right now. You already told us a bit about Saving Maria, so I'm wondering if you can tell us, give us a little introduction to your first novel, The Dangerous Game, if you wouldn't mind. So if readers want to pick that up, they know what that book's about.
Okay. The Deadly Game was my first novel, and I was inspired to write this because I was living in South Florida at the time, and my husband and I would go on bike rides every Sunday through Coconut Grove. He always played this game with me where he would ride ahead and hide somewhere, and I'm riding along, and then he'd come up behind me and scare me by tapping me on my shoulder. We went every single Sunday. I thought to myself, what if he disappeared? That's how your mind as a writer works. Go, what if? So I thought, what if he disappeared? So that's how I started that novel, where the opening of that book, the husband and wife go for their Sunday bike ride, and he disappears while they're riding through Coconut Grove, and she can't find him. So, she goes all over the place, and then later she's home after checking the hospitals and all that. Detective comes and tells her that they found him. He was shot in the head. Mm-hmm. So she was wondering how the hell that happened. Why was he shot? What happened to him?
And that's how you're a writer. Something normal from the everyday inspires that what if question. And all of a sudden you have a novel. But I should tell anybody tuning in, The Deadly Game, we actually spoke in length, in depth about that novel for our last interview. So I will drop that in the video description in case anybody missed it and wants to check it out. But great premise for a book. And it does show you the twisted mind of a writer. What if?
Yes.
You think those things, and you have to be a writer because then it's acceptable.
You think about these things and then you twist them around and you go, what if this happened? You think things are normal, but if you're a writer, you always go, well, what if this happened? And everything goes the other way.
Right. And I think, that goes along with the line of advice. Everybody says, write what you know, but you don't have to take that as like a literal interpretation. You take something that's familiar and then twist, and all of a sudden, you have yourself a great suspense novel.
Exactly.
Right. So next question for you. Is there a book or an author that you think your readers might be surprised to know that you've read and enjoyed? So something that they might not associate with Lynn Sheft. Obviously, we think mystery, suspense, thriller. But, what would I be surprised to know that you've read and enjoyed, do you think?
A writer they wouldn't think I would read. That's tough because, I really stay with the genre unless something pops out at me at a bookstore or in a library where I hear an event. I usually stick to that, but I do read nonfiction. I like to read biographies here and there,
Sure.
I've read Brian Kilmeade's history books. You know him from Fox.
Yes, right.
He's written several historical novels, historical nonfiction books, which are very good. And like I say, I don't normally read nonfiction, but that's, I look for somebody who writes well and can tell a good story, because if I'm going to read historical nonfiction, I want somebody who can write like it's a novel.
Excellent. All right. So I have seen you on Facebook, and I've seen your face with the likes of people like Michael Connolly, but I am wondering is there one author that would or did make you weak in the knees upon meeting? Has that meeting happened yet? And if it hasn't, who would it be?
Absolutely. John Grisham. John Grisham came to R.J. Julia here in Madison. And I've always admired him. I read many of his books, and I read the first book that he wrote. And I thought, wow, he's a good storyteller. And when at R.J. Julia, they had it in the upstairs. You've been there, right?
Yes.
Up in the upstairs room, which is very cozy. And so he gave his talk, and then I went up to meet him and shake his hand. And I was so flustered. I said, "Hi, Lynn, I'm John." And he laughed so hard. I said, I'm Lynn, and you're John. So he just laughed. He thought it was cute. He gave me a big hug.
That's awesome. Can't go wrong with John Grisham.
He's very sweet. And, it was funny. And everybody in the room laughed because they knew I was flustered. But I was not embarrassed. I thought it was fun.
I was good. Well, that's great. Enjoy it. You made a memory. Like, you made a moment with him.
Yeah, I'm sure he remembered me. I mean, who else, does?
I was going to say, I don't know if I saw a picture of you with him. Maybe I just saw John Grisham and you were on the floor.
No, I post pictures. I've also seen Scott Turow. I met him. It was pleasant. And Linda Feinstein. I met her over at the R.J. Julia. And of course, I met Michael Connolly many times. I met him several times in Florida, and then they had him up here in Connecticut. I've met many authors throughout my life. And, it's an enjoyable experience. I like getting my book signed. So it's fun. And now that I'm an author, I can sign books for people.
I know. How great is that?
It's fun.
I know. You've been the one handing them your book, and now you're the one people are putting a book in your hand and saying, please sign it to me. I love that full circle moment, when the reader becomes the writer.
It's wonderful.
It really is. There's nothing like meeting, your favorite authors, especially when they sort of exceed your expectations. People say don't meet your heroes, but I don't think that that's always true. And particularly when it comes to writers, a lot of times I think people are surprised at how genuine and generous they are. But I think, authors are our rock stars, and we appreciate that, and they know it. And so they oftentimes really reciprocate it in a way that other celebrities, might not. But you obviously keep good company, so I'm glad to hear that you have had good experiences.
Yeah, they're all sweet. The only one I had a bad experience, his initials are JP.
Oh,
I met him probably in the 1990s, and he was extremely rude. So with that, I don't read his books.
there you go. That's how you lose a reader. It's actually funny, if I'm thinking of the same JP that you are. I met him actually at R.J. Julia.
Did you?
Not that many years ago. And, I had heard stories. And so I went in kind of leery and was surprised to not find him that way. But maybe it was just a good day.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so I want to ask you, you've had multiple careers. So I'm just specifically talking about your career now as a writer. Has there been an I've made it moment for you? And if not, what would that moment look like if you haven't had it yet? What do you think the I've made it moment as a writer would be for you?
For me, my goal is to get these books and any future books made into a movie series, TV series, or a movie. Because since I was a copywriter and I wrote TV commercials and whatever, when I write like a visual, like cinema. And these books, I think, are cinematic. And I think they would lend themselves perfectly to a series or a movie. And the people who have read it have, who've talked to me about it say, I thought it was great. I think it should be a movie or a series. So that's my ultimate goal, is to get them produced. Now, trying to find a producer, I need all the help I can get.
All right. Well, anybody out there, if you have connections, feel free to let us know. But I think, you do write very cinematically, and this would translate beautifully to big screen, small screen, any kind of screen. So let me ask you this. What is your greatest literary ambition other than having a book adapted for television or film? Do you have another great big literary ambition?
Another great literary ambition. Well, I could get it reviewed by the New York Times, but they're not going to do that with, they don't really do that with independently published people, indie authors. So I don't see that happening. Reviews are wonderful. It's wonderful that, John, that you do this to help get exposure for indie authors. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to do it. And I mean, we are so rich in talent, and there are so many wonderful writers publishing independently. And, it makes me sad to think that some people aren't going to pick up those books, might not even know about those books, when there's great stories, to be had, and great people who are telling them. And you certainly are among those. All right. So a moment of reflection. Let me ask you this as we are winding down. How has your life in reading and writing informed the way that you live? So how have books enhanced your life?
Well, books have enhanced my life by making me very observant of the life around me, of people, characters. When I'm out in social situations, I'm always grasping everything: characters, people, or conversations, dialogue. I mean, that all helps a writer if they're observant. And that's what I do. And I, observe the environment. I look outside, I take it all in. And it helps for, if you can retain that in your memory, when you write, you can draw on that when you're writing to make things rich. Writing scenes and all that. I was a copywriter for many years, as you know, and I wrote a lot of real estate copy. So I had to describe the environments, the interiors, and all that stuff when I wrote brochures or ads or anything. Right. So one of the things people have told me when they read my books, they said, I feel like I'm right there, because I hone my skills on description of environments, the ambiance, and I romanticize the copy. So people like that when they read my books. They say, I feel like I'm right there. People who read my books, read the books, The Deadly Game, they said, I felt like I've never been to South Florida, but I felt like I was right there, and I had a sense of what it was like. So now when they read Saving Maria, they'll understand what it's like to be in Bogotá, Colombia.
I was in a sweat when I was reading this book. I was nervous.
Were you? Yeah.
A little bit, and I love too, we're on the boat with Maria. We're on the plane with Maria. I mean, you're really traveling through, some difficult situations with her, but it's very visceral, and you do feel like you were in the situation with her. And I mean, how much higher stakes can you get than that? So it must be a great compliment for you as an author to have people tell you that they felt like they were there with your characters. That's outstanding. And so my final question for you, is there a third book coming? And assuming that there is, can you give us a little taste of what that might hold for us?
Well, my next book is historical nonfiction. And I had this premise of setting it during 1941, December, with Nazis. The espionage and agents. Well, I had the opportunity to talk to an FBI agent, and he talked to the historian, and he corrected my time frame. So now I have to regroup and figure it out, because most of those people were rounded up or put in camps. So now I have to rework my premise of this espionage during World War II, which I want to do because my mother was young at that point, and I wanted to put it in her frame of mind what was going on at that time. And I'm trying to weave her story into that background of what was going on during the war.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so I like the idea, and she's looking for her father. She's never met her father, and she wonders where he is and who he is. So I'm trying to intertwine that whole idea of the espionage.
That's excellent. I love it. So never the same book twice with Lynn Sheft, which is
No,
outstanding. All right, I am going to let you off the hook now, out of the hot seat. But I will remind readers, now that you have gone between the lines with Lynn Sheft, you got to go between the pages. Check out Saving Maria. It is available right now. Lynn Sheft, thank you for being here. It is always a pleasure chatting with you.
thank you, John. Thank you so much for your time.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.